Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, we'll be looking at how to build a Spring Boot application, and so for that we'll be creating a new Spring Boot project. But before we get started with any of this, I want to let you know that this video is divided into two parts. And the first part has to do with the initialization of the project, configuration where I explain some details about this project, and then we'll start building our application, and then we'll create the REST endpoint for our application using Spring Data REST. Then we'll look at how to use our environment variable right in IntelliJ to save important credentials from plain sight. These credentials include the data source URL, our database password, as well as the name of our database. And the second part has to do with securing our application. We'll be implementing on Spring Security as well as the JWT authentication security. And then we'll also be looking at testing our application. And finally, we have to deploy our application. We'll be deploying our application to two different hosting platforms, and that is the Render and the AWS hosting platform. So now there are a couple of tools or perhaps softwares that we'll be making use of for us to get started with our application. And prior to this moment, if you don't have these softwares, I'll beckon on you to install them. They include the PostgreSQL DBMS, we have Postman, and we also have IntelliJ and Java. So if you don't have any of these installed, I'll be providing a link to this video where I have shown a step-by-step procedures and guide on how to install each of those inside of your computer. So do well to watch those videos, install those different tools and softwares, then you can get started with the project. So I want to believe that you are already getting built up for the project. You've installed all of those softwares using the video, the link I have provided in the description. And yes, pretty much you know what we do at IO Codes, and that is algorithm, software installation, as well as some tutorials. Now if this is your first time of coming across this channel, please I beckon on you to subscribe to this channel, give this video a thumbs up, and also ping that bell icon so that whenever I upload just the part 2 of this video, you get notified, and many other videos. Now please, viewers that have been here for quite some time now and you are yet to subscribe, please just do so, just to support this channel, and God bless. So now we have to bootstrap our project by creating our project folder. Now to create a Spring Boot project, there are a couple of ways to do that. If you are making use of the ultimate version of the IntelliJ IDE, you can create a Spring Boot project directly from IntelliJ. But since I'm making use of the community edition, there is no option for creating a Spring Boot project. But if you want to do that manually, you can go ahead, create a Maven project, and then you provide the different dependencies inside of the pom.xml file. So that is the manual way to do things there. Now you can also use the Spring Suite IDE to create a Spring Boot project. But to make things simpler and easy, we'll be making use of the Spring Initializer website, and we'll provide the details, and the Spring Initializer is automatically going to generate the folder for our application. So for that, I'll open up on Chrome. I want to head over to the website start.spring.io, and I'll click on enter. So right now you'll be prompted with this Spring Initializer website, and yes, our project should be a Maven project, and we have to click on Maven, and our Spring Boot version should be left as is. That's 3.1.5, the recommended and most stable at the moment of recording. And what we want to do is change our group, and for that I'll be using iocode.web.app, and for my artifact, that should be iocode book project. And yes, I think everything is as it's supposed to be. We have the description of our project. Now we have to include the different dependencies we'll be needing. Okay, before that we have to make use of the Java JDK 21, and then we have to include the different dependencies. So just hold your control and then start clicking on different dependencies. So we'll start with Lombok, and we want the web Spring Web application. Also want Spring Data JPA, and we want Spring Data REST. So that should be Spring Data REST. And we'll do Spring repository, REST repositories, and we also want the Postgres SQL driver dependency. So control and enter. And like I stated, this course is divided into two different parts. And the second part has to do with securing our application as well as the testing and the deployment. So until then, we'll just leave the different dependencies that we have. But when we get to that part, we'll then include the Spring security dependencies to our pom.xml file, and then we'll resolve those dependencies. So enough of that. This dependency so far is okay. Let me just look through. Okay, we have Lombok for annotation. We have Spring Web, Spring Data JPA, REST repositories, that's Spring Data REST, that is automatically going to provide the REST APIs for our entities. And then we also have a Postgres SQL driver. So I want you to make sure that you have Postgres installed already. Now if you don't have it installed, you can as well use the link to that video in the description section of this particular video. Now enough of those, we have to generate our directory, our folder structure. So just click on Control and enter, or you can as well click on the generate button at the bottom. It is going to generate our directory for us, our folder. So as you can see, it's a zip file, and what we want to do is extract the zip file. So I'm going to click on this tab here, and then I'll show in folder. What I want to do is extract this particular directory. So I'll do a right click, and I'll be using 7-zip to extract. So we have our book project. I'll open it now, and I'll also open it, and then we can start our application with the use of the command id 64 with the space and a period. Then I click on enter, and this is going to open up our application inside of the IntelliJ IDE. So now our application have opened up, and yes, I want to just give a basic walkthrough of how our project structure should look like. So if you are familiar with a Spring Boot project before, you can go ahead and skip this part and just move over to the place where we'll start implementing our entity class, as well as calling the different endpoints. But for the new viewers and those that are new to Spring Boot, I want to walk you through the project structure. So in IntelliJ, we have a couple of ways for us to see the different files inside of our project. We have projects, we have packages, and when I click on package, you see the arrangement has changed. So also it applies to project files. These are the different files that are present inside of the project. And then we can look at production. Production just has to do with the different files that make up the production environment. Now I'll just leave as project. This is basically what we'll be using throughout, because it's a complete project. I want us to use this particular directory structure. It's easier to understand if you're a beginner, but you can also work around with all of this for the test environment, and that is it. Now moving over to our project and tab, you can see we have a couple of directories and even files. At first we have the source directory, and inside of this source directory we have our main directory, and inside of this main directory we also have two different directories, which is the Java, and we also have the resource directory. Inside of Java, you can see we have our package, which is the iocode.web.app package, and our main application class. And as you can see, this application class has been generated automatically by the spring .start.io, that is Spring Initializer, when we set up our application details. So it's automatically going to add this, and this will be the main entry of our application. So moving over, we have the resource folder. Now, when we talk of resources, we are talking about different files that will be used by the application to like complete the whole application. Let me put it that way. And we have the static directory and templates. Now, this too has to do with most times with Spring MVC application, where you have to make use of template. Then you have your HTML files, your CSS files. So these are the different directories that those stuffs are placed in. Now for our application, the properties, it's quite empty now. It's empty. But we have to provide configurations that Spring is going to use. So after downloading all the dependencies inside of our pom.xml file, so Spring has to configure those dependencies, these classes from those dependencies, so that our application will run properly. So all of those properties that are not being set by default by Spring, for example, the data source, will place them inside of this application.properties file. Now, with all those stated, let us look at the pom.xml file. Then I'll start providing the configurations for our application.properties file. So I'll open pom.xml and we'll look at the project structure. So we have the project, and as you can see, we have details of our project. I think this should be at the top before. I can as well just leave it like that. Let's leave it like that. So let us take a look at the project. So this is a project, and inside of the project we have a parent, and inside of this parent we have the org.springframework.boot and the artifact of the Spring Boot project, as well as the version we are currently using. You know, we did 3.1.4, but due to the fact that I'm not currently connected to the internet, but the different dependencies that are inside of my local repository are of 3.0.4. I had to switch over from 3.1.4 to 3.0.4. So sorry for that. I just want to let you know that. Now, since this has a parent tag, it means that our application is a child of the Spring Boot application. That automatically makes it a Spring Boot application. Now, remember the group ID we set, ioko.app.web, and this is our artifact for the project, and this is the version snapshot, and yes, the name of the project and the description of the project. Demo project for Spring Boot, I think, but you can go ahead and change it to look more matured. I'll just do that right here, and I will make it my book API project application. I think that is more matured, and yes, we have our version, which is JDK 21 as at the time of recording this video. Now we have a couple of dependencies. We have the JPA that we'll use with Hibernate to query data from the database. We also have Spring Data REST that is automatically going to be creating REST repositories for us, that is REST endpoints. And we have the Spring Starter Web. So this Spring Starter Web dependencies lets Spring know that our application is a Spring Boot application. Now we have the Postgres SQL. Remember, I stated that we'll be making use of Postgres. I've also stated it previously during the selection of dependencies from spring.start.io, which is Spring Initializer. We need to download Postgres, and following that step, you have to take note of your port number, and that is all. We'll be configuring the Postgres database inside of our application properties in just a moment from now. So Lombok is a dependency that is automatically going to help us generate getters and setters method, as well as we can also use builder interface for our application. Now we have the Spring Data Test, and we have the group ID, and we also have the scope. The scope here tells us that the Spring Data Test whatsoever will be done inside of our test directory, that is this test directory. integration testing, unit testing, all of those will be in the scope of test. They won't be added to the production the full production package. So when we shift to production, the test details will not be added to our production details. Now there is even something we'll be doing when we start testing our application, and that is we'll use a different database, an embedded database. But let's get to that point at first. So with all those stated, let us fill up our application.properties. But at first I want to run the program before that. So right here, currently I'm just going to click on this run button, and then we'll see what will happen if we fail to configure our application.properties file. So just enable annotation processing for Lombok. So I'll click on this, and I think the annotation processing has been automatically set. So you see the error stated we'll be having: application failed to start. Now let me read through. Failed to configure a data source URL, attribute is not specified, and no embedded data source could be configured. And we failed to determine a suitable driver class. The action we have to carry out is consider the following: if you want an embedded database, please put it on the class part. If you have database settings to be loaded from a particular profile, you may need to activate it. No profiles are currently active. This is due to the fact that our application.properties file is currently empty. And for that, we'll be filling this application.properties file, and then we'll take a close look at running of our application one more time. So to fill our application.properties file, we have to start with the driver class name, and that should be spring.datasource.driver class name, and I think org.postgresql.driver. Now the next is the spring.datasource. I'll basically just copy this stuff, Control C, because I'm making use of it in the next two lines. .user name, and that should be Postgres. But before that, we want to specify the URL of our data source. So I'll Control V that stuff I copied, then we just do URL. This should be JDBC :Postgres SQL to be precise, then a colon, then / localhost colon our port, which is 5432 / Postgres. That should be the name of our database. So that is it. Now the next on the line is spring.datasource. The password for our database, and that is root. I have to mention something out for you guys. Now in the development part, when we'll be hosting our application in cloud, all of this stuff will be placed inside of an environment variable. And even before that, I'll show you how to place these details inside of an environment variable inside of IntelliJ. So automatically when we are running this application, the Spring is going to automatically look for those environment variables and place them inside of the placeholder that we'll be using to draw the environment variable. The common sense, that's it. Now the next thing for us to do is to configure JPA before we run the application. Now the different data we need for the configuration of JPA includes spring.jpa.generate DDL equals to true, and we also need spring.jpa.show SQL equals true. Then we need spring.jpa.hibernate.ddl-auto equals to update. So what this show SQL does is it will show the different SQL queries that are being carried out by Spring during the runtime of the program, by JPA to be precise. So when we call an endpoint that requires querying data or creating new objects inside of the database, those commands, those queries are going to be shown on the screen. Sorry, they are going to be logged back on the console. So that is it. Now the next for us is to set the property of Hibernate, and for that we want to use the spring.jpa.properties.hibernate, and I want to format the SQL. So all of the different queries that will be logged out on the console, we want them to be in a formatted form. So we set this to true. And yes, I failed to mention, now spring.jpa.hibernate.ddl-auto simply determines simply sets how our database is being created, our different tables, sorry, not database, we have the database created already, but how the different tables inside of our application are being created. So for an update, it means that if there is a table with that particular name, just update that table during the initialization of the project, that is starting up of the project. But if we have a case of create, it means that if this is the first time and that table does not exist before, just create that table. And we also have one as create drop. Now for create drop, it means that when the application runs and the application is terminated, then you also have to terminate that table. But we'll leave it as updates. What update does is that if the tables are not present, it is going to create them, and during subsequent call or queries to the table, or even when the application stops, the table is still going to be present there. So I think this should be the different properties we need currently. Now if there are other properties, we'll be coming here and we'll be filling those properties in the future lessons as the lesson goes by. So that is it. Now I'm going to run the application again, and when I run the application this time around and it runs successfully, we can start creating our entity classes. So that is it. I'll do a shift F10 to start the application. So now our application has started successfully. This is due to the fact that we have configured our application.properties file. So Spring now has the different properties for it to kickstart our application, so our application will run successfully. We have started the application in about 10.5 seconds, and so that is it. So that brings us close to the end of this particular part. Now the next part, we'll be looking at how to create our entity classes for the application. Okay, now we have our project, and our project has started running just a few moments ago. We looked at configuring our application.properties files, and I also walked you through the pom.xml file. Now the next thing we are going to be looking at is creating our entity class. As you know it, this is a book related project. It's a book API endpoint we'll be creating with REST, Spring Data REST, and we'll be using the REST repository interface for this stuff. Annotation. So now I'm going to open up my file directory, my file tree, and yes, this is the pin, and I'm going to collapse this and run, and I'm going to stop the application for now. Control F2 for that, and yes, we reduce this a little bit. Okay, and I'll collapse this once. Now, at our topmost package in the Java directory, we want to create a new class, and this class will be placed inside of another package. So for that, I'm going to do an alt insert. That is the keyboard shortcut for creating a new class. Click on enter, and I want to place this class inside of the entity package. So I'll do entity dot book. So this should be our model class, which is the entity, and that is book. The book we'll be talking about. Now, when you think of a book has some features such as the book name, which I'll call the title, the author of the book, the release date, we'll be using release there instead, and then we'll also be looking at other features of the book, other properties of the book as it comes along. So for that, we are going to create these different classes, these different fields. That will be private, string, title, and we also have private, string, author, and then we have private, string, year, and then I think that should be it. Let me think, what does the book also has? Well, for now, that should be all. What I want to do is, okay, I just remembered something, and that should be the price of a book. There's no store you are going to get a book for without going with your money. So you need the price of the book, and that should be a double value. So I'll say private double price. So probably if you have any other properties of the book that you want to add to it, you can as well go ahead and place that property inside of the book class. Now we are going to annotate the book class with the @entity. So what this annotation simply does is that it tells Spring Data JPA that this is an entity class, and as an entity class, it has to make a relationship between SQL and the object. So this object right here, a book object, will be a representation of a table inside of our database. So this table is going to have these different fields as column. You understand? So this will, inside of our book table, we are going to have the different fields such as title, author, year, and price, and that is pretty much it. Now there's something else we have to annotate our class with again. That is the @noargs constructor, and we also have to annotate with the @allargs constructor, and then we have @getter and @setter. So these are the basic constructor we want to, the basic annotations we want to annotate our class with. So this getter and setter are from Lombok, as well as allargs and noargs. Getters and setter is going to create getter and setter method for our class, which is the book model. And yes, we still need one thing, and that is the @id annotation. And it should have a feed of private, long, book, my god, book ID, and this should be a field that is automatically generated by JPA, and we're going to do at generated value. I want to set a sequence or sorry, a strategy of generation type. Why is this thing just coming up unexpectedly? Sorry for that. We want to do a strategy of generation type dot auto. So that is it. Is there anything I'm missing out? Now, if there's something I'm missing out, I think I'll also fall back to the video, to this particular class. Sorry for that. Now, moving over to our application class, we'll be creating a new book and we'll be storing that new book into the database. But before that, we want to make sure that we have our repository interface that is going to automatically keep saving this book details inside of our database. So for that, I'm going to open the file directory again. That should be hot1. And inside of our entity class, our entity package, I'm going to create a new repository, and that repository should be an interface and it should be titled the book repository. And this repository is going to extend the CRUD repository, so we do extend CRUD repository, and we have to pass in the book class as well as the type that it has as ID, which is of long. And then we have to annotate our class, our interface to be precise, with the at rest at oh boy, it's quite annoying. What's wrong with my mouse? At repository rest resource. So this annotation right here is going to make our book endpoint a repository a rest endpoint. So this repository rest resource is going to make sure that when we call the book endpoint, we'll have a list of books that is being stored inside of our database, and as a repository resource, it's going to fill this our book repository interface with the different method that is associated with the book, with the CRUD repository or interface. So we have created our repository. Now we want to save our first book data into the database. So for that, moving over to our main class, we have to implement the command line runner. At first, so I'll write implement command line runner, and this should be lowercase implement, not uppercase I. So I'll correct that. Implement. So we have it. Now we'll have to import the interface, and then we want to implement the run method that is defined inside of the command line runner. So now we have to define our book repository instance that will be used to save the book to the database. So we have to make it private final, and then we have to annotate our class with the as required as constructor. So we are just testing for now. We want to just place a book inside of our database, but during the course of this video I'm going to undo the whole of this stuff. That's, I'll remove the implement command line runner and also the final book repository, as well as deleting the run method from this particular class. So now we want to create a new book instance. For that we are going to say book new book is equal to new book. Then we want to pass in the title of the book, I'm giving it the name of Gotham City, and the author should be Jeremy Williams. The price, I think I made it a string, so that should be the year, sorry, should be 2000, and the next should be the price, which is 250 USDs, and I want to add a semicolon. Now we have to import the book class, so we'll do an alt insert, or sorry, alt enter. I'll choose the one from our package, which is iocode.web.app.entity. So that is the one I will import, and I'll click on enter. So there's something I have to point out. Remember when we defined our book class, we didn't put this particular constructor. So you have an error. So all you have to do is define this constructor, which takes in 4 different parameters as the parameters: the title, the author, the year, and the price. Now this year is of type string. I'll be making a correction to that later in this video. We have to make it of type int, because it's just going to be 4 different values, which is between year 1000 and year 2000. So with that stated, let us run the program and see if our book will be saved to the database. So I'll run the program in a few seconds time. Okay, I think we have an error that says java.lang.no such feed error. Now this error is related to the current JDK I'm making use of, so I'll have to make some correction. So I'll move over to my pom.xml file, and I think I still have JDK 17 installed in my system, so I'll change to JDK 17, and then over to my project structure. I'm going to change the project structure. I'll change the current JDK and I'll make it 17, and I'll apply, and then I'll click on OK. So the indexing is going to start. Now if you made use of the Java 21 and your version of the your Spring Boot project is still 3.1.4 and you don't have this error, then you are good to go. But I don't know why I was having the error, so I had to look for the solution and I had to fix it. Now I have to run the application again. Oh, we have upgrade module SDK in project setting to 21 or higher. Okay, I think I failed to review the Marvin pom.xml file, so I'll review. So my review of the pom.xml file is complete. So like I stated, if you're still making use of the JDK21 and your application didn't throw any error, then you are good to go. So just continue with that. But now we run the application since my build is complete, and then I think we'll have our first book in the database in just a matter of seconds. Also, our application has started, but I missed one particular thing, and that was saving the application to the database using the repository of the book class. So I'll do a book repo, and I want to call the method .save that saves the new book, and I'll do a new book. Don't just really know what happened. I just forgot those stuff. Now, moving over to application of the properties. This should not be how our database is going to look like, because I'll also be implementing a new class and will use relationship for our project. So right now I'm going to change from update to create job, and then I'll run the application. First of all, I have to stop the server, which Control F2. Then I will do a Shift F10 to run the application. So now this time around, if you see, the application has started in about 13 seconds. Now when you look at the bottom, you can see Hibernate. So Hibernate is inserting the details that is being stored inside of this new book into our database. You can see insert into book, author, the price, the title, the year, and also the book ID. So the values are being represented by this different question mark. So that is how Hibernate is going to automatically fill up our database with the data. Now we are hard coding it right now from the main class just to show you. Now when I move over to our command prompt, by going over to this search bar at the bottom and searching for CMD, and I open CMD and I connect to my Postgres instance with the command PSQL, that should be in lowercase, PSQL. I'll do a -u, capital U, then I put the username, which is Postgres, and then we do h localhost and a -p for the port 5432, and I click on enter, and I'm passing my password, which is root. That shouldn't be left out. Then I select all the details from the book database, select start from book. You can see we have the book inside of our database with the ID of 1 Jeremy Williams, the price is 250, and the title is Gotham City, and the year of publishment is the year 2000. So that is it for populating our database with the book details. So now let us move over to our book class and look at the different fields we have right here. So now when we take a look at the book title, it can be represented as a string. We look at the year, it can also be represented as a string, but I want to change this to a type of int. So I think this should be it. And like I stated, we won't be making use of this constructor anymore, so I'm going to delete the whole of this constructor, and then I'll move over to my main class, and I would unimplement the command line runner interface. I just want to show you an example, and then I'll remove the repository as well as the different import statement, as well as our required ask constructor annotation. We just have to leave our main class clean. So moving over to the book class again, we can see we have author. Now, for the field of an author, it can be represented as an object. So we want to create a class, an entity, author, so that we'll be able to relate our book class with our author class. That is, we want to make a relationship with JPA in this particular application. So I'm going to change this from type string to type author, so that will be author. And yes, I don't have the class created, so I'll click on it and click on this red icon, and I want to create class author, and I have to specify the package. It should be inside of this entity package, and then I'll click OK. Now it's saying if I want to add to Git, or of course allowed to add it to Git, and then I want to go over to my book class again. Then all of these annotations, I want to copy them all, and I will be pasting them at the top of this author class. So now I have to provide the feed for the ID of the author. So I'll do a private author ID, private long author ID. And as an author, the author has a name, the first name, the last name, and also an age. You can also model other things such as the address of the author, but these are irrelevant. I just want the table and the columns to be as little as possible, to not be much. So I'll use the private string f name for first name and private string l name for last name. And then I want to make the private string private int age. So that is it. And this author field is going to have a list of book. So an author has a list of books he or she has written. So we want to create a field of private list. Then we'll pass in the book since it's a type parameter, and then we just say books. I'm going to import the list class, the list interface to be precise, and that is it. Now moving over to the author class, moving over to the book class, we want to create a relationship between the author class and that of the book class. So in this book class, we want to create a relationship, and to create a relationship we have to use an annotation from JPA, I think. Let me collapse this one at the bottom. And that annotation should be at many to 1. And inside of the author class, we want to annotate the book field with the at 1 to many. So in real life scenario, we have this kind of situation whereby an author has written so many books, or a group of authors has written a group of books. In that case, we have a many to many relationship, but I want to keep things simple. We want to just use a one to many relationship and a many to one relationship. So in this scenario, only one author can author so many books, and a book can only have an author and not multiple authors. So in the case where a book has multiple author, and this multiple author, there are scenarios where they also have a multiple book. They have written multiple books. Sorry. In that scenario, we make use of the many to many relationship annotation. But since Since I want to keep things simple, I want to make use of the many to one and the one to many relationship. So now all I have to do is run the application, and you see where we'll have Hibernate tells us it has created a relationship between these two particular entities. So to do that, I'm going to use my Shift F10 to reload the application. Okay, it happens that I have an error. So let me see where that error is coming from. Say starting application context to display condition. Can't create name with entity manager file to define class path. Or so let me take a look. Okay, io.web.app.entity.auto has no identifier. That is, there's no ID in my class, and I think I failed to also include that. So I'm going to copy this ID from the book class and do a Ctrl C and also paste it here, Ctrl V. Now I also failed to create the auto repository at first, so I'm going to create the auto repository now before we just run the application again. So that should be auth insert, and click on Java class. This should be an interface, and I'll do auto repository, and I'll click on enter. So don't ask again, just add to it. So now, as usual, this class is going to extend the CRUD repository, the interface I mean. So we have the CRUD on repository, and this should be auto and long. Then at the top, we want to annotate with the resource repository rest resource, and we want to run our application. So before the application finish running, I want to select from auto, and let me see what I will have. You can see relation auto does not exist, but when the application is completed, when it starts running, we can go and check if we have the table auto inside of the database. So for that, I'll do the command again, and you can see we have the details of the author, and we have select all from author, and we also have our book, and you can see we also have the details, and we now have the author ID. But we want to make a correction to this. We don't want author ID. What we want is just simple author ID. So I'll move over to my class again and make those corrections. Then I'll reload the application. And so starting with the author class, we want to make a couple of configuration using this one-to-many annotation. So at first, what we want to do is determine the cascade type. So we do a cascade. We want to set the cascade type.org, and then the next is the mapped by. So inside of our books class, we are going to map this author class to a column known as author. So that is it. And when we move over to our book class, we want to add other properties such as the fetch type, and we want to make it fetch type dot lazy. Leaving as fetch type.eager, leaving it as fetch type.eager is going to load the author for all the books we are calling. For each book we call, Hibernate is also going to load the author associated with that book. But for the lazy instance, it is only going to load the author when a reference to the author is made in our application. So the next thing to do is to add the adjoint column annotation. and that should be at during colon, and we want to pass in a name attribute. That name should be the author. So we already have it, the author. That is why I did a mapped by author at this particular point. So the next thing is for us to run the application, and then we'll see the structure of the different tables again in our database. So I'll do a shift F10. So now our application has built up successfully. Now let us take a look at our structure of the table. So we'll do a select from book again, and now you can see that we have author, just author at this particular point, and no longer author ID. So with the annotation drawing column and its property of name, you can change the relationship column, the field, the particular name of that column. You can change it to any name of your choice. So I'll also do a select start from author, and you can see we also have the details of the author. So that is it. The next step is to now change our database type to update, since we now have the required structure of the database. So do an update. Yes, we can run our application again, and then we'll start calling the different endpoints of our application. So now we have our database the way we want it to be, and we've also seen how to implement JPA and Hibernate in order for us to abstract the database connectivity of our application. So with all those stated, when we talk about Spring and REST APIs, in the normal sense, we have to create a controller class, and this controller class, we have to create different REST endpoints for this particular REST controller class. Now, when we talk about Spring Data REST, Spring Data REST helps us automatically do all of those, in as much as we just have the dependencies inside of our application and make use of the repository REST resource. Everything is set and we are good to go. So with all of those stated, let us call the different endpoints in our application, and for that I'll open up Postman. So I think I have it right here, and before I call the localhost endpoints where our application is running, I want to start up the server. So I'll click on this run icon, and yes, in a few moments from now it should get started. And so our server has started successfully. So the first thing we want to do is to send a request to our localhost 8080 port, and then we'll see the response we'll get. So as you can see, we have the books, we also have the authors endpoint. This is what Spring Data REST automatically exports for us. So it creates this different endpoint. Now when I click on the books endpoint, you can see and I send a request to that endpoint, we'll have this embedded at this top, and inside of embedded we have a list of books. Currently in our database there are no books, so we haven't yet posted any request to the database, and we'll be doing that in a moment from now. So we have this link that links to the book itself, the book endpoint, and when I click on it again, it takes me back to this book endpoint. But when we have a list of books, we'll have their different endpoints, like the slash the ID of the particular book. So that is it. With all those stated, let me move back to IntelliJ, and I want to make some corrections and add some other configurations to my application.properties file. Then we'll run the application again. So right here, I want to add a new configuration, and that should be spring.data.rest.base path, and it should be equal to v1 slash API slash v1 slash API, and create job is no, it should be an update. So I'll start the application again, and then we can post our first book to the database. Control F2 to stop the server, and Shift F10 to start it up again. So now that our application has started again, let us open up Postman. So that is it. We are here at the Postman, and I want to delete this stuff. Delete, and delete. I want to start from a clean slate. Now remember, I changed the base part inside of the application.properties file, so we have to add this particular part to the localhost 8080 endpoint. So this would be our base part for the endpoint of our books. So this v1 simply stands for version 1, and this API, as you know it, we are building a REST API, so that is what it's really all about. So now I'm going to move over here, and then I will add that base part to this particular endpoint, localhost 8080. If I fail to do so, like in this example, and I send, you'll see we have a 404 not found. This is because I've changed the base part of the Spring Data REST. So I want to correct that, so I'll use the slash. I'll do v1 slash API, and right now I'll click on send. And you can see we now have our new endpoint as slash v1 slash API slash books, and we also have slash authors. Now I want to post a new book to our database. We want to send a post request. For that, we just have to click on this, and right now, if I call the get request of the book, we have empty books, but I want to send a post request, so I'll send a post request, and I want to move over to the body tab at this bottom here. Click on it, and we want to change to raw, and instead we are not sending a text format, we are sending in a JSON format our data. Remember, our book has some fields, and one of those fields is the title. We also have this price, we have the author, and we then have the year it was published. So we want to send a JSON object, so that should be a curly brace, and we want to start with the title, and the title should be Gotham City. I think I'm missing this. Okay, just correct it properly. Now our author so now the price of the book is 250, and the year it was published should be 2000. So with this, I can post this request to the books endpoint, and yes, our details will be saved inside of database. So I'll send, and we have the new details of the book. So we have the first book, which is Gotham City, the year it was released, the price of the book, and then we have the link that leads to the author of the book. Now currently this particular book does not have any author, but we'll be fixing that with the use of a patch request in the Jiffy form now. But let's also populate our index with our book database with other books. So you see, we have a 404 not found for the author of that particular book, since we don't yet have the author. So I'm going to delete the whole of this, and I'll call the book's endpoint again. So we have Gotham City, and we have the year, the price, we have the link to it, and then moving over to the bottom, we also have the other links that are associated with the book's endpoint. But when I want to go to Gotham City book endpoint itself, I'll have to click on this particular link that says save. This is the ID of Gotham City. Now the next thing to do is to add another book. I want to just populate it with a couple of books. So moving over to raw again, and just go over to this one at the top. Since we have a body, I just have to edit the details in this body. So we should have what is the name of this book called? Romeo and Juliet, and the price should be about $100, and the year, just come up with any year. I didn't really know the year that book was released, so I'll just do it 1923, and I'll send. You can tell me the year it was published in the comment section. I don't mind, we learn every time. Now you can see we have the details of our book, and we have a 201 created status right here. This is what I failed to mention earlier. This is the HTTP response code you have when you've created a new data and post in your database. So we have a 201 created. For a get request, we have a 200 response. Okay, so now I want to get the books, all the books inside of our database. So I'll send this request again, and you can see we have 200. Okay, now we have the Gotham City with an ID of 1, and then we have Romeo and Juliet with an ID of 2, and their respective details also. So that's it. Now the next thing we want to look at is how to load authors. So for that, I'll click on this particular point, this particular book endpoint, and then I'll change to author, and we want to send the get request at first, and we'll discover that we have a 404 not found. Okay, it should be authors, sorry. So we have our authors endpoint. Now at first we want to send a post request to the authors endpoint, so I'll change to post, and our author has a first name which is represented as F name. He also has an F name, and an L name, that's the last name, and an age. So for the first name, I'm going to do Jeremy Williams, and for the first name, that should be Jeremy, and for the last name, that should be Williams in quotes, and the age of Williams should be about 29. So all these are data I came up with, and they are not necessarily the correct data, so just pardon me. I think I still have, okay, I have double quotes at this beginning, so I think the error should be gone. So now I'll send a post request to the author endpoint. And yes, we have an author now, and to look at the list of books that have been written by this author, we click on this endpoint right here at the bottom, and then we send a get request to know the number of books that have been written so far by this particular author. So in the next phase, we'll be looking at how to send a patch and also a delete request, and as well as an update request, which is a put request to our endpoint, our server. So now we have seen a couple of requests, which is the get request and the post request, but there are still some requests that we haven't seen. This HTTP request includes the update request and the delete request. So we'll be looking at these two types of requests in this particular section. So I'll open up on Postman again, and right here on Postman, we'll discover that when I send a get request to our author endpoint, we have just one author by the name Jeremy Williams. So what I want to do is send two more requests to this author endpoint with the same field, Jeremy Williams, with an age of 29. So I'll send it the first time and I'll send again. Now when I go over to my terminal and I select all of the authors from the database, you will discover that we have author with different ID 1, 2, 3, but with identical data. We have Jeremy as first name for all of the authors and Williams as the last name for all of the authors with the same age. This is due to the fact that I've sent identical data over time, 3 times for that matter. So how do we correct this data, and how do we remove duplicates from our table? So I've opened on Postman again, and I want to call the get endpoint of from the author, so you see the author clearly when it has been properly formatted. Now we have Jeremy Williams, and we also have it again, and we also have it again at the top point. Now let us see what the update request is going to do for us. So to update one of these Jeremy Williams, let's look for the Jeremy Williams with ID of 2, which is this particular one. So I'll click on this link, and to update its content, I want to click to send a put request. So this is a put request. Now in the body, what I want to do is send new data. So remember, we'll move over to the raw text, and I want to change to a JSON format, and then we want to provide the body of this particular request, since it's a post request. So post request is similar to post request. So all the data that I'll be sending in this particular request will form a new author object, and that new author object will replace the author object that is at ID 2, that has an ID of 2 in the database. That is the correct word to use. That has an ID of 2 in the database. So what I'll do is create a JSON object. So I'll use curly brace, and then I want to pass in the F name of the author, that's the first name, and that should be Williams, and the L name should be Shakespeare. So now what I will fail to do is pass in an age for this particular author. I want to see how the put request that updates data in our database is quite different from the patch request. So these two requests, they do the same thing, which practically is to update data, the put request and the patch request. But the put request does it in a way that it replaces the data that have been stored in that particular index, or that has that particular ID. That is what it does. But for the patch request, it just replaces the particular field that have been set over through the request. So we'll see the patch request in a moment from now, but let's look at the put request at first. So I'll send again, and we have the 200 OK as our response. And you can discover that the response we have here is Williams, and we have Shakespeare with an age of 0. Initially, the age of the author at this particular index, Jeremy Williams, was 29. But due to the fact that we failed to send the age alongside with this put request, it has been replaced automatically by 0 because it's of type int. So Hibernate automatically provided a default for us when it created the table. So if we fail to pass in an age, it will give us a value of 0 because it's of type int. Just take note of that. So now to correct this, we are going to look at the patch request. So I'll click on this put request and I want to move out to the patch. And what we want to do is send in just the age of this particular author. So we have AGE, age. And I want to give William Shakespeare an age of 43. And I want to send to this particular endpoint. So I'll send now. And we also have the response 200 OK, so everything went out successfully. So you see the difference between the put request and the patch request. Now this time around, we just sent the age of Williams Shakespeare to our endpoint at a particular ID. Now what it does is it just look for that particular field and just replace that particular field. Previously the field was 0, but with the use of the patch request, Williams' age is now 43. So just take note of that. If I had made this a put request and do something like send a put request, you would have seen that this F name and the L name would be overridden. So I'll just copy the whole of this, Ctrl C, and then I'll send the put request again. So you can see that we have F name as null and last name as null. So that is how the put request differs from the patch request. So I want to correct that, so I'll do a Ctrl V and then I will send properly. So that is it. So we've corrected it, and you can discover how the put request differ from the patch request. Just take note, the put request is automatically going to form a new author object and store the data of that object in the author table in our database, while the patch request is going to just match the particular feed and set that feed in database to the particular value we sent along with it. So now the next thing to look at is the delete request. So when I send a get request back to our author endpoint, when I send a get request back to the author's endpoint, you will discover we have Jeremy Williams. We also have Jeremy Williams again, and we have Williams Shakespeare. Williams Shakespeare has an ID of 2. Just take note of that. But in the case of Jeremy Williams, we have a duplicate twice. So what we want to do is delete one of the Jeremy Williams in our database, and I think we should delete the one that has an ID of 3. So I'll just click on this particular one with an ID of 3, and then over to this point I'll change from the get method to the delete method. So I'll scroll down and I'll choose the delete method, then I'll send. So our response is 204, no content. So the delete was successful. Now what I want to do again is call the endpoint of our author with the get method, and when I send, you will discover that the duplicate Jeremy Williams is gone. So that is how the requests work. So I'll open my terminal and then I'm going to select all the author one more time, and you will discover that we have Jeremy Williams and we also have Williams Shakespeare. These are the two different data we now have for the author table in our database. So now let us look at how to link an author to a particular book data. So I'll go to the book endpoint as books and I'll send, and we have Gotham City and we also have Romeo and Juliet. So for Gotham City, I want to link the author as Jeremy Williams. So I'll move over to the author tab, author link of Gotham City. Just take notes, we have details for the Gotham City and we have a link to Gotham City itself. We have a link to itself again as the book and self. Then we now have a link to its author. So I'll click on this, and what I want to do is change my request from a get to a put request, and then I'm sending in data. I'll move to raw. Then inside of this header, I'm going to create a content type. So I'll do content type. I want to pass in the value of test slash URI dash list. So this is our content type, and at the body I want to copy the whole of this. Control C for that, and I'll paste it right here. Oh, my bad. So I didn't copy that properly. Control C. Oh boy. So I'll paste it, and I'll change the book to author slash ID1. So this is the link that leads to Jeremy Williams. So when I click on send, you'll discover that we have 204 no content as our response. And then when I call the get method of this particular book author, you'll see our response will be okay, we got an error. We'll be fixing this error in a jiffy from now, but let us take a look at our database. So moving over to our database, when I do a select from book, you discover that at Gotham City we now have an author with an ID of 1. So that particular author, I'll do a select. So this is my mouse misbehaving again. So I think I'll just have to fix it, then I'll come back to the video. So I want to apologize for that error that just kept popping up due to my mouse. It was misbehaving. But for what I was saying was that we will discover that we now have a book inside of our database that has an author with ID 1. So let us call the author with that particular ID. So we'll do a select star from book where author ID equals 1 and semicolon. So it looks like okay, that's wrong. Select star from author instead, not or not books. So I'll do author. So we have Jeremy Williams. Take note, we now have Jeremy Williams. Now what I want to do is set the author of Romeo and Juliet, and as we all know, that should be William Shakespeare, right? And then we'll also be sending a patch request to this particular book endpoint with ID of 2. The reason is because I made an error when I was typing the name of Romeo and Juliet when I sent the post request, and you discover that I have double AN instead of a single N in the case of the AN spelling. So that was the typo error, and I'll be correcting it. So let's move over to Postman, and then we are going to call our book endpoint again. So I'll send, and yeah, Romeo and Juliet. We are going to look at the author of this particular book. We'll click on it, and then since we want to update the author, all we have to do is send a put request, and this put request we want to specify the body. The body should be raw, and then we want to copy the whole of this. Control C, and I'll paste it right here. Control V. I want to specify the ID of William Shakespeare, and from our database we want to check for the ID of Shakespeare. Scroll up, we'll discover that the ID of Shakespeare is 2. So that will add it to this particular one, and then I'll change this one to authors. Remember, we are going for the authors endpoint. and then inside of our header I want to set the content type. So I'll do content type. It should be test slash URI dash list. So just take note of all of these little details. Now I'll send, and when I send, we have a 204 no content. Then we'll go over to our terminal again, and then what I want to do is I want to call all the columns in my books data. So I'll do a select star from books, book to be precise, and you now see that we have the book ID 1 and 2 with their respective author ID 1 and 2 respectively. So for Romeo and Juliet, it has an author with ID of 2. So I'll do select from author where author ID equals what? Equals 2 and a semicolon and send. You can see we have William Shakespeare. Now all of these are Postgres relational queries. Now if you want me to make a course on Postgres in the future, you can just let me know in the comment section below by commenting, and I would think I pretty much do a course on Postgres SQL in the future. So with that stated, let us now update the name of the book Romeo and Juliet. So I'll call our book endpoint again. I'll send, and okay, I think okay, because the put, so it's supposed to be a get request, then I'll send now, and we now have we have Gotham City. Yes, we are looking at Romeo and Juliet, so that should be ID 2. So I'll click on it, and I want to send a patch request. So this patch request, and the body should be raw, and instead of text should be JSON, and then I'll send the name, which is the title, that should be Romeo and Juliet. So what I just have to do now is send, and you can see I've made sure I corrected the spelling of Romeo and Juliet, and you can also confirm that too by checking on the terminal. So what I have to do is just select all columns from book. So we now have Romeo and Juliet spelled correctly. So that is it. Now you discover I said we'll be looking at something else. That is when I decide to call the author endpoint of this particular book. I do that with get request. You'll see I have an error that says internal server error. So this is what is behind the cause of this error. Let me open up IntelliJ. Now when I bring up my build console, not build the console itself, my log, you discover that an exception was thrown, and it says no serializer found for this particular class. No property to create bin serializer to avoid exception. So we have to disable serialization feature. So what this implies is that when we move over to our book class, we'll discover that we have a feed of author. So this is going to call this particular author, that is the endpoint to send. But inside of our author class, you'll also discover that we now have a list of books. Now each of these book lists is automatically going to call the author feed by themselves. So to make a correction to this, we have to annotate our book class with our author class, to be precise, with at JSON ignore properties, and then we want to specify the properties to ignore. So we'll just say value, and it should be in double quotes Hibernate lazy initializer, as Hibernate lazy initializer. Then we want to give another parameter which is handler, and then over at the bottom where we have our book list, we want to annotate with adjacent ignore, and then that is it. We are good to go. So what I just have to do is I'll stop the server, Control F2, then I'll run the server again, and then we'll call our author endpoint. So as the program is running, I want to explain in more detail what really happened in this scenario. So the book endpoint calls the author of the particular book, and in turn this book is also going to call this author is going to call the list of books that has been written by him, and that book in turn is also going to call those respective authors. So it's not like fall into an infinite recursion or an infinite loop. So that is why we have the exception thrown by Hibernate. So we have to correct this with the use of adjacent ignore properties annotation, and we have to pass Hibernate lazy initializer as the value and the handler. Now we also have to annotate the particular field with adjacent ignore. So now we can call this endpoint in a very safe manner. So I'll send, and we discover we have a 404 not found. So I don't know why we have a 404 not found, but let me see what will be printed out on the console. So I guess there was no values, but let me check my database. Oh, think we are dealing with a create job error here, with a create job situation, not an error. So I'll move out to my application.properties, and we have the update. So maybe along the way I've changed it. So what I have to do is to run this program, then I'll fill up the data again, then we can fall back to the video. So all of the details have been placed back as it was. I'm sorry for that. I guess I don't really know. So now we can call our book endpoint, and we can also see the different authors of those books. So I'll send, and I have a 404 not found, so I'll delete this slash at the top, and I'll send again. Now I have the list of book Romeo and Juliet, and we also have Gotham City. So I'll click on the author, and then I'll send a get request to get the author of this particular book. So you now see we have Jeremy Williams and the age 29, and that's 500 internal error has been resolved. So with the use of adjacent ignore and the adjacent ignore properties annotation, we have sorted out that issue. Don't forget, you should do it in the author class. You can also do it in the book class, just depend, but I prefer to do it here. So I ignore the properties of the list of books, and except I access the endpoint of this particular book, don't call it. Now any feed that is being generated by this particular entity, by this particular feed, don't give us those feeds. That's what the JSON ignore annotation is standing for at this point. So now we have seen how to successfully create the API for our book project. Now the next step is to secure our application. So now we have successfully created our endpoint for the book API. We have populated our database with different books, about 2 books, and also our author database, and we've linked these entities using Spring Data JPA, and Spring Data REST has provided us with the different API endpoints. Now let us take a look at securing our application. So when we talk of securing our application, a lot of things come into mind, and one of those is to have users for our application. Without users, we can't determine how the security of our application will be, because we need to grant specific users specific access to the application. So for an admin, an admin or a super user might have access to different things, such as adding a book to the database, deleting a book from the database, or some other actions. For a normal regular user, that user will be able to view all the books in the database, buy those books, and as well as add those books to their wish list. So with all of those stated, before we get started with security proper, let us take a look at our application.properties file. So I'll move over to the resource directory and I'll go to the bottom, application.properties. Now I want to talk of security. If we are yet to hide this stuff, such as the URL for our database, the username of our database, and even the password of our database, then even the security we are talking about is yet to be properly implemented. So what I will have to do, I want to change the whole of this stuff. Instead of hard coding them, I want to put a placeholder at this particular location and then provide these details in the environment variable. So for that, I'm going to Control C this stuff, Control X to be precise. Then I'll put a placeholder that says RODB underscore URL, and I'll do the same for the next two. Control C, post it there and paste it there also. So for this one, we have RODB underscore username, and for the last one, we have RODB underscore password. So now to add this configuration proper, to add the details, move over to this icon at the top, to this bar at the top, click on it. Then we want to edit the configurations. So we have an initial configuration that has been generated by IntelliJ already. So if you don't have it, you can as well go ahead and create one, and that configuration, name application, and provide details for the configuration. So what I want to do is over to environment variable. I want to click on this tab. Now I'll add variables. So the first one should be the arrow so the first one should be my oh boy the first one should be my RODB underscore URL, and I'll provide the value for that. That should be JDBC colon Postgres SQL colon / localhost colon 5432 / Postgres, and the next one should be RODB underscore username, and the value should be Postgres, and the next should be the RODB underscore password, and our value should be our respective password for our database. So that is it. Then I'll click on OK. Then all I have to do is apply this setting, then I'll click on OK. So before any other thing, before I start creating our user entity and implementing security for our application, I want to run this project again, and you see it will work properly as is expected. But now we have hidden these details from plain sight. So anybody that has a copy of our source code would be able to see these details and also provide their own configuration, their own values in their environment variable. So that is it. So that is how it works. Now we successfully secured this database details. So the next thing is for me to open up Postman, and then I think I'll just do a simple GET request to the books endpoint, and you see that it's still going to work despite having changed the configuration in the application.properties file. So the application has started. Now we'll call the book endpoint. And you can see we still have our book with a status of 200 OK. Now the details of our book have been sent back as the response entity to Postman. So that is it. Now with all of those stated, let us get started with implementing security and adding users to our application.